Okay.
Okay, great. So I'll back up a little bit. All right, so we're going to be talking about making an impact with PowerPoint, the importance of storytelling, the concept of control and why that is key, some tools that you can use that we're going to put in a toolbox for you, some design tips and tricks to create a better slide, and we'll be going through some demonstrations, and then we'll recap at the end. Cool? Great. So before I begin, I want to talk about this notion of impact, right? And making an impact with an audience. What I'm trying to do right now with all of you is to make an impact, whether it's with my voice, my pacing, or my slides. I want to make an impact. Now, why is that important? Maya Angelou once said, and I've always, this has been kind of a North Star for me. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Think about that. The stuff I'm saying right now, years from now, you may not remember the words, you may not remember the exact slides that I put up or the techniques or the tools, but my hope is that you'll remember I would have made an impact on you. I would have connected with you, even though we're through Zoom, with a feeling. And only through that connection, I believe, can you really make a lasting impact with an audience. So now, how do you get to that point of making, imparting a feeling, right, and impacting that? It really starts with control, this notion of control. So I have a couple of visuals here. If you want to be a great storyteller, right, and this is my image for somebody telling a joke, they could be giving a pitch on a concept. Before you can get to this point and make a great tell a great story, you have to have control over your audience. So think about a kindergarten teacher trying to teach, a subject to her kindergarten class. If 30 kids are running around the room and not paying attention, she's not going to be very effective, right? So the first thing you want to do is you want to get absolute control over your audience, right? In a friendly way, of course, right? So that you can control the information that's being delivered to them. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that and give you some examples. After you have control, then you can start telling a terrific story. Only after you have control and you've delivered a great story can you make that impact on an individual, all right? So it's super important to focus not just on telling a great story, what's in the middle here, but the beginning, right? Getting control of that audience so that ultimately you can create an impact. And what is that impact at the end? The impact could be winning a scholarship. It could be closing a deal on like we do here at Zeta. It could be it could be making going on a date, right, with someone that you want to go on a date with. So to get to that impact, you have to have control and tell a great story. Here's an example of a bad slide, right? It's horrible. It's too much information. It's all coming at you at the same time. Notice that as this slide went up, you stopped paying attention to me, right? The human brain is designed to basically solve puzzles. Think of it that way. So what I just did is I put this crazy puzzle up in front of you. You're not paying attention to me. You're trying to really solve this puzzle. So I'm going to stop it. So now, hopefully I would have gotten some of your attention back, but you're still trying to figure out, okay, why is he putting this slide up? Well, what this slide represents is something called a Rorschach test, right? We may have heard of this. It's something that psychiatrists do, or it's an ink blot test, where they will show a patient a series of images like this and ask the patient to decipher it or interpret what they're looking at. And psychiatrists can then use that information to help diagnose someone. The point is that what this ink blot on this page represents is absolutely it's unique to you, right? It's unique to me, and I might see a frog, someone else may see a beetle, whatever. That's not the point. The bigger point I want to make is when you put a PowerPoint slide together, and there is so much happening on that page all at once. What you have just done is you have given up control of your storytelling to that individual now that's looking at that slide, who's tuned you out, and they're trying to solve that puzzle of what's on that page. So what you want to do is you want to regain control of that individual. And how do you do that? Well, the way you do that is through the concept called a build, right? It's another term for this would be animation, right? We've all seen PowerPoint slides that have animation in it. And it's not just, we've seen bad examples too of animation, right? Where it's zany and crazy and stuff's flying all over the place. That's distracting. But when done right, a build or an animation can slow down the delivery of information, just like I'm slowing down my speech, and it enables the presenter to have control of that slide. I can control exactly what you're looking at by doing these builds, and I can, and it's also a concept called progressive disclosure. And what progressive disclosure is basically like telling a joke, right? You tell the setup, you tell the middle piece, and then you tell the punchline. You deliver one piece at a time, and you build on top of it, and you give the audience only enough information they need to be processed at that time. All right, so what do I mean by this, Ian? So let's take a look at that first slide, last slide I just showed you, that horrible slide with too much information. Now, what I've done is I've taken away all of those images, and I just have a headline, right? And forget whatever the slide says, if it's blah, blah, blah. But the point is, I can now take control and say, okay, folks, what I'm about to explain to you is customer experience optimization, or whatever's on here. And the way it begins is this. And there are things going on this page, which I won't get into the details. And these are important things. The end goal is to get over to the other side here, which is to get in front of customers and to understand what customers are interested in. It's also important to gather information from customers. That bottom arrow will feed those customer data points back into this AI brain in the beginning, ultimately resulting in better communication back to the customer through these various channels. So you see what I did there? I took that crazy slide and I broke it down into 4 digestible chunks. I was able to focus your attention on where I wanted you to focus your attention on, tell my story, then build. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. All right, that's again the concept of progressive disclosure or a build, highly valuable. And a little bit later on, I'll explain to you how you actually would do this. Okay, here's another example of a slide that has too much information and it's coming at you all at once, right? A lot of noise. You probably didn't take much information. You probably stopped listening to me, right? When that slide first came on, again, you were trying to process it. And B, you probably didn't take much away from it. Now, here's how we would do that slide with a build. So everyone is talking about 5G today, right? It's certainly in the news, and most folks even have a 5G phone today. But let's talk about the impact of 5G on the business landscape. Well, what 5G is going to do is it's going to cause the explosion of a lot of new devices, sensors and phones and watches and all of these things, even washing machines. It's called the Internet of Things, IoT. And all of these IoT devices are going to lead to an explosion in the number of connected devices. The prediction is that it's going to almost double from 2020 to 2023, from 31 billion to 51 billion little devices that are all connected to the internet. Now, all of those billions and billions of new devices, they're going to create a lot of noise, a lot of new signal, and it's going to be overwhelming if you're a marketer and you're trying to make sense of all those data signals coming out of those billions and billions of new devices. Well, that's why you need artificial intelligence. You need AI to process all of those signals so that ultimately you can have a business outcome, some actionable insight, some information that you can use to transform that noise into a business outcome. All right, so that's my pitch. But you see my point. If I wasn't able to do that build, I probably wouldn't have been able to be as effective in communicating this slide to you, right? All right, I think you guys get that point. All right, so how are we going to do these things? And you know what, Kara, we're actually doing good on time, so I'll pause here for a second to see if there are any questions or anything in the chat, or if anyone on the phone would like to ask.
Yeah, I actually had a question about the beginning. You were saying that you need to maintain control and then do your storytelling for the impact. What do you do when you lose control or you didn't establish control effectively at the beginning? How do you recover from that during your storytelling, or what are some tips for maintaining that control?
Right. So that's always a tough thing, right? When it depends, right? If you're in Zoom, the way that it's first of all, if you're in Zoom, it's incredibly hard to understand if you have control or not, right? Usually because there's no feedback loop. I can't see people in the room. I can't hear folks because they're muted or tuned. They may be tuned out. They may be tuned in. So that's why in Zoom, it's important to kind of do what I just did, which is to pause and then pull people back in, right? And to check in on folks. Is this making sense? Do you see how this can be a benefit to you? Those types of questions. Now, if you're in the room and you're losing control of the room, oftentimes what I do is I stop presenting. I actually will, there's a way that you can stop presenting on the screen and the screen actually will go dark. When you do that, it automatically causes a reaction in the room. People stop and they wonder, well, why is this happening? This isn't normal. So it's important to do something that in some cases can be jarring to kind of disrupt what's happening in the room if it's incredibly out of control. Now, if there's a person or an individual that you've noticed in the room that is, kind of the main culprit in terms of throwing the meeting or your presentation off track, I would engage with that person directly, and then get their permission to continue with the presentation with the promise that you're going to come back to that person at the end, perhaps offline, to address their concerns or go deeper or so forth. But it's important oftentimes to acknowledge that person, and sometimes that's all they want, right? There's all sorts of personality and psychological issues that are behind why someone can be disruptive or a heckler in a room. But it's important to really kind of meet that person head on. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to the two scenarios of how you could lose control and some ideas of how you regain it. If there are no other questions, I'll move on. Okay, great. All right, so now on to some tools on how you can, you actually do this building that I'm talking about. The first one is something called grouping, and it's actually really crucial in order to create a build. So it's, and this may be tougher for us to do over Zoom, but I actually put together a couple of slides that can help illustrate this, so you can practice offline, or ideally maybe there could be another workshop that I'm happy, Kara, if you want to do a sort of a PowerPoint tutorial, we could set up some more time to do that. So the first thing you would do is simply hit the control button and left click button on any object you see on a screen. So now imagine you had a PowerPoint slide filled with a bunch of stuff, and you're like, this is too much. I want to just take a portion of this screen and have it turn it into a build, kind of what I did before that crazy screen. So what you do is you control left click every single object on there, whether it's a graphic or whether it's copy, a text box, and then you get these bubbles around it. These are called handles. So now when you have clicked on all of the different objects that you want to group together, you keep left clicking, control left clicking. Then you right click and you open up what's called the group menu, right? Which you see off to the side. If you hover over group, that will open up another submenu that will allow you to take all of those little objects that you can see that I've highlighted in those handles. All of those objects then become one single object. So this is where you can take 19, 20, 100 different little elements, and you can make them one object. Now, once they become one object, it's much easier to control. You can then decide when you want this big chunk of stuff to appear or disappear. So here's an example of that slide that I was starting with, where there's a lot of information, a lot of copy. It's a ton of stuff to really throw up to an individual at first, an audience at first. So what I wanted to do again is I want to take the stuff off to the right and group that together so I could control when I would present that to the audience. So here's the example of before we get to that, I'm going to talk to you a bit about animation. So animation is when an object actually appears on a screen, right? So there are many different ways that PowerPoint has dozens and dozens of ways that you can do this. I prefer to be more elegant and more polished in some of these. And like I say here, not zany, because I think that then it becomes a distraction, right? It becomes folks are looking at the animation and not paying attention to the content. Also, if you may have seen these presentations where every different animation may be different, something may fly from the top or the bottom or the side, or it spins around, then it becomes the audience then turns this into a game. They're like, okay, what crazy zany animation is Ian going to see next? So they've completely tuned you out. They're not listening to your presentation or what your storytelling. They're now sitting there and watching a show, right? A PowerPoint show of these zany antics that's going to happen. So be super careful again with the way you use animation. Make it and it could be something that pops, right? Doesn't have to be super polished, but at least keep it consistent so they know, okay, the animation is always going to happen this way. So then they become bored with that, right? They get back to focusing on your content. Cool. All right. And do experiment. I've been doing this for many years, and I've played around, and I've landed on 5 or 6 different animations that work really well for me. I've gotten comfortable with it, but definitely do play around and practice. As I mentioned before, be consistent with the types of animation you have, because then it becomes distracting. There's an animation pane. You can see here in the bottom that I've brought up here. If you click on that animation pane, it will actually show you, give you options in how your animation can be activated or triggered. And a trigger could be, hey, I want that animation to start when I click my mouse button. Okay. Your animation can start in sequence. It could be after one animation appears, in 3 seconds, the next one, in 3 seconds, the next one, and so on and so on and so on, right? So you can be really sophisticated in how you actually do these builds, and you have the power to do that again by using that animation pane that you see there. And there's the animation pane. Okay, so here's an example. Going back to that, we did the build, right, with the content. Notice that I took that stuff out of the right side of the page. I can talk about what's on the left, and then boom, I can now, since that's grouped together as one object, I can talk about that when I'm ready to talk about that. Again, another way, again, of maintaining control. Now onto some design tips and tricks. Any questions before we move on to design? Nope. Okay. So first off, when we've all seen PowerPoint slides that have a super tiny copy, right? Lots of copy in there. It's really dense. And that is not the way PowerPoint was ever designed to be used, right? A lot of times people will think PowerPoint is a Word document, right? Word is for dense copy, and that's fine, or even Excel, I guess. But PowerPoint is more of a more visual way of conveying information. It's supposed to be fewer words, images, and then again, the storytelling aspect. There is this rule called the 6x6 rule. Notice what I did there, right? I did the setup before putting the animation up. And the 6x6 rule basically says that you want your copy to be no more than about 6 words going across the screen and no more than 6 lines going up and down, okay? Now, is this a hard and fast rule that you have to follow? Absolutely not, right? I don't. I use this as a guide. When I feel that I'm going too nuts with copy and it's getting too dense, I'll remember the 6x6 rule. It's just a rule of thumb, right? To be very efficient with the words that you use on the screen. Don't feel you have to have a complete paragraph to convey a point. It could be a word, right? Like you remember the slide I had before where I had control, and then storytelling, and then impact, right? There were only 3 words on that page, but I was able to tell a complete story, right? And without filling up that page with a ton of copy. And ultimately, I think it became a more impactful screen. So here's an example of a page with just, again, too much copy, too much information. The rule of thumb generally is that less is more on a page, right? To go from this to go to this. The next rule, you want to be consistent in your font, even contrast, the size of the copy as well. Another important rule is something known as the 10-20-30 rule. The 10-20-30 rule. And what that basically says is that some of the best stories are more concise, right? Folks usually will give you about 20 minutes of time to listen until they start tuning out. So 20 minutes of time basically means you've got to keep it to about 10 slides. And again, getting back to my point before of size, you want it to be easy to read, not squished on a page. So 30-point font, nice big font is something that is recommended. So 10 slides, about 20 minutes of content, and nice, clean font, large font that is concise. And the last rule that I like to talk about is my rule. I think I came up with this. I haven't seen it anywhere else. I call it the highway billboard rule. So I'm a nut, right? I love ads. I love commercials. I love driving down. I would look and I was like, oh man, that's a crappy billboard. Oh, that's an awesome billboard, and so on and so forth. The next time you're on the highway and your road, looking at billboards, you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about now. National companies like a Geico or an Allstate or a Verizon, so forth, they will have billboards that have a big image, right? Like Geico will have the Geico, something's instantly recognizable, the Geico lizard or gecko rather. Then they will have the name of the company, right? And then a simple call to action, right? Lower your insurance, save money, or whatever it is. Or if it's a movie, if they're announcing the Top Gun Maverick movie, it'll be obviously blah, 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 Tom Cruise's face, name of the movie, March 27th, whatever the date the movie's coming. My point is that when you're driving down a highway at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, you don't have a ton of time to process information on a billboard. You'll be shocked to see how many billboards are they're just shoving information into there. And at the end of the day, you're like, you have 2-3 seconds. You're like, what did I just see? What were they even thinking about? So think of this, that's an extreme example, but when you're doing a PowerPoint presentation, Think about that as well, right? You want to have a concise billboard, an image, a headline, and then that call to action or some bullets in there. Those three components, you want them to be sort of in balance. One of the points, getting back to consistency, is this notion of belt and suspenders, right? You don't want to do both, right? So here's a goofy example of someone wearing both a belt and suspenders. It's too much, or it's overstyled. So you want to pick one or the other. So in this example here, you can see what I've done is I've underlined, I've used italics, I've used highlighting, I've used different color for fonts. It's too much. Pick one that you want to use to make emphasis or a point, and you and the audience will benefit from that. So avoid suspenders and belts. Visual balance it's a photography concept, and it's based on something called the rule of thirds. So if there are any photographers out there or videographers, they will understand that. And essentially, the way this works is that every image that you look at should be divided into nine smaller boxes. My sister's calling. Let me just say, can I call you later? Great. Sorry about that. So, and what you want to do in this kind of grid, right, of 9 boxes, is you generally want the image to be lined up with one of those bars that are going north-south on the page, right? So one of those vertical axes is the ideal spot to put an image. So not dead center, but actually slightly off the side of the page. And also your headline should usually be in that top 1/3 of the page. So headline area in the top 1/3, your image in that sort of third line that comes down. And the reason for this, it's been scientifically proven that if you put the main point you want to make, or the main copy or the main image, dead center on a page, what happens is, the way the human brain works is that you will focus on the middle of that page, on that image, that headline, that call to action, whatever it is, it becomes a bullseye on the page, and you are less inclined to move left or right or up or down, because in terms of your brain, it's mission accomplished. You've zeroed in on that target in the middle of the page. Now, if you have an image slightly askew off to the side, or a headline or call to action that's not dead center, what happens is you will, after you look at the image, your eye will wander, and it'll go to the middle of the screen, it'll go to other parts of the screen. So it's almost an invitation for your eye to wander and to move around the page. I know it's some heavy psychobabble perhaps, but it's been proven actually with test groups that they've had images placed on different parts of the screen, and it's been more effective when they've used this concept of the rule of thirds. Did I lose everybody, or are you guys still with me? Still with me? All right, great. I'll keep moving. All right, graphics. I am a big, so obviously, again, I mentioned PowerPoint is a graphical medium, a visual medium. So I love to use actually, it's fun for me, right? To Google an image that really, I believe, captures the emotion that I'm trying to convey on that page. If it can be inspirational, relatable, all the more. And again, this goes back to the point, right, by Maya Angelou at the very beginning of, you want to make an impact. The first way you make what's important in making the impact is creating a feeling, right? But that's how you will get remembered. So be creative, be bold when you're using your graphic to make that impression. This is a presentation that I did way back when, and I was talking about 5G, and I was talking about this innovation wave that was coming, and the impacts that that wave was going to have, the transformative impact that wave was going to have. And I said, hey, why not just get an awesome picture of a wave? And I searched and I searched and I searched, and I landed on this. And half of my presentation was this picture of the wave about to crash, and that one word at the top of the page, disruption. And you'd be surprised, you'd be shocked at how much you could of a story you could tell with a picture and even one word. And you look at this image long enough, and if I were to talk about it long enough, you could actually impart feeling and emotion through this way more effectively than 30 slides with tons of graphs and copy and on and on and on. So I want to underscore that point of using the right image, limiting copy, and allowing yourself to tell a story. It takes a heck of a lot more work because you have to then craft that story, and you got to memorize it, right? So it's a lot easier for folks to just put a ton of stuff on the page, because then they just read the page. But that's almost a guaranteed way for you to lose your audience, because they can read the page as well. And then they're going to say, well, what do I need you for? They're just going to completely tune you out. And we don't want that. Okay, so high impact slides, you want to use concise copy, which I talked about before. You can make a complex point using very few words, be visually compelling, and use build. So here's an example of a value proposition for Zeta. The entire company Zeta, that's around 14 years, our value proposition can be relayed in these symbols down at the bottom. PII starts for personal identifiable information. Data is all the signals that a person generates as they move around the web and do stuff. AI is the machine learning that we use to process those signals. And then the output is a actionable piece of business intelligence that a marketer can use to connect to that person. So how would you put that together? So demo one, we start off with PII, right? I talked to you before about how to actually create a build and to do grouping. So PII plus data plus artificial intelligence ultimately equals. So the point here is that I can actually control that conversation a heck of a lot more, again, using these builds. So here's an example of where you're using builds, but you're also using imagery and incredibly limited copy on a page to convey a complex story. Now, I've seen people talk about our value proposition as a company, or what makes us different, and on and on and on. And they can go through 10 slides to cover what basically I just walked through using these images and using builds. And I'll leave it up to you to I think you can understand what makes more impact with an audience. Cool. All right. All right, we're wrapping up here. We're running right on schedule, so that we'll have a few minutes for any questions at the end, but we will wrap up on time, Kara. Just heads up to you. All right, so recapping again, where did we begin? We talked about Maya Angelou, who said that you guys may forget this, the content of exactly what I had in the slides. You may forget about that Rorschach example, that ink blot test that I talked about, and how you don't want your slides to be that. What I hope is that that I imparted some sort of, I created a feeling in a weird way through Zoom, that I connected with you, and my hope is that feeling is what will get me remembered, and by me being remembered, I would have made an impact on you in the importance of being a better storyteller via PowerPoint. In order to be a better storyteller, right, you must, number one, have to control your audience. Now, I'm not talking about being an incredibly rigid person where no one can talk or laugh or ask a question. That is not what I mean by control at all. Control is basically having the control is the ability to convey your story the way you want to convey your story in the right order, and having folks focus on the content that you want them to focus on when you want them to focus on it. Make sense? So control is absolutely key to being a better storyteller. And once you do have that control and you combine that with an awesome story, you ultimately land with an awesome punch or an impact. So in closing, this is my last slide. You want to leverage PowerPoint to make an impact and to be remembered. Utilize this notion of builds or progressive disclosure, right? Builds to win control. No more Rorschach tests. Practice all of the tools, some of the tools that I talked about, such as grouping, the animation pane, triggers, and so forth. Lastly, my number one recommendation to you is to seek feedback. Create a presentation and go to someone that you trust and give them permission to give you complete honest feedback on how you present it. But even more importantly, ask them to replay the presentation to you. Ask them, like, hey, what did you learn? What did you take away from what I just did? What you're going to learn from that is you're going to learn where you need to really maybe change or refocus your presentation if you start seeing that people are missing the point that you're trying to convey. Okay, so give people permission ahead of time. And I've done that in meetings where I've gone into meetings and I'll turn to someone like Rob on my team. I'll say, hey, Rob, hey, at the end of the presentation, I'd love if you give me, 1 or 2 or 3 points on how I can be better, or even what worked well, so that I can know that. So give folks permission. So with that, I'm going to end. I'm going to turn it back over to Kara. Kara, if there are any questions, happy to take them, or happy to give you some time back.
Now, I'm sure that the students will have questions, and I'm just going to ask, if you do have questions, just introduce yourself and tell Ian and Rob what team you're on. You're going to see Ian and Rob a little later in Media Scholars Week as well, during one of your agency visits. But before we open it to questions, I just want to thank you, Ian, for having a tremendous impact on all of us today. I learned things that either I didn't understand myself, and I have some great takeaways from this. And I think you hitting that 5th point, seeking feedback, is really, really critical, and sets folks who have really succeeded in this competition in the past apart from the others. And one other suggestion that I might advise students to think about doing is actually recording yourself giving your presentation, so that you can also pick up on any distracting movements or filler words or those types of things that you're using in your presentations that with practice you can eliminate. So, but thank you. Can we all give him a hand? Because I think that was just tremendous and very, very valuable and timely.
Thank you. That's very kind of you, and very clever use of impact in your feedback, Kara. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Do folks I don't have any questions in the chat, but if you have a question, now's the time.
Was there something that you, like Kara said, was there something that really stood out to you, that like an aha moment that you're going to start doing, or you didn't know that you were doing wrong before?
I have both a question and an aha moment.
Right.
Hi, my name is Lexi. I'm on the concept crew team with Drew. We're from Indiana. So my aha moment was talking about animations and progressive information building. That's something I definitely plan to utilize But my question is about for in-person presentation, what's your thought on using note cards or binders for things like statistics or information you're concerned about remembering? Is that an okay tool, or are there better ways to do that?
All right. So I'm going to be blunt with you. I don't like those. I don't like using note cards. Generally, it conveys that to your audience sometimes that you're not in command of the information, right? And you don't. And it's, in my mind, maybe I'm wrong, right? But in my mind, it's almost giving a little bit of control away, right? I want to be the authority when I'm in front of the room. And as an audience member, I would feel better, more invested in the presenter if I believe that they were a true kind of master of the information. So that said, if you can memorize some of those stats, that would be ideal. If you can't, that would be a good place to put those stats up on the PowerPoint slide, right? So you can go into, and I'll make something up. You can go into, why, Bert is better than Ernie. There was the research group, 89% of the people thought that Bert was a better Muppet than Ernie. But if you think, I'm going to get stuck on that stat, you can do the setup, and then you can click, and then all of your stats can be in one nice, neat little box that comes up on the screen. And then you can turn to the screen and say, as you can see, stat A or stat B or stat C. And that's an easier way to convey it, but I wouldn't use a card if you could. I would use the screen.
Thank you.
Sure. Yep. Hey, Trinity.
Hi, yeah, my name is Trinity, and I'm on the team Droping Clomparens with Marta Droping. We're in Washington State. And my question, and what kind of stuck out to me in this presentation, was the wave example of having one photo that you put up to kind of disrupt the presentation in order to, catch people's attention. My question, I guess, would be, how much of that is too much? Because I know you want to make an impact with it. So I'm just kind of curious how you used that in your presentation. Like, how long did you have it up, and how often, or did you put it back up? I guess that would be my question. Like, how did you use that? How did you utilize it?
Yes. So I used that in the beginning of the presentation. At the very beginning, when I was talking about the problem, and I was trying to get people to pay attention, say sort of like, hey, something really big and important is coming, and either you can be prepared for it and kind of ride that wave, right? Think of a surfer on there and have fun with it and enjoy it. Or if you're not prepared, you could be washed away, right? So there's a tremendous event that's coming, and you can prepare for it or you can ignore it, but it's still gonna come. So I will go and I'll talk about that, and I'll use a metaphor, and it, even as I'm talking about it now, you guys are remembering this, right? And you can, there's people are nodding, and there's a feeling as I'm talking about that wave, and you remember that wave. There were a lot of slides that I went through, about 30 slides. I guarantee that wave slide is probably one of the key slides you're going to remember. So coming back to the point of imparting a feeling or emotion or driving impact in a meeting, that's how you do it, right? It's find one image that really kind of captures what you're driving at, and maybe have one word of copy on there, and do it. I remember there was a presentation. I was at Microsoft for a long time, and this is maybe 15 years ago, that one of the engineers went on stage, and he was talking about, he had a picture of a taxi cab in the middle of Tokyo, and it's crazy, and that's all he had. He had no words. I'll never forget this. Here it is 15 years later, I'm talking about it. And what he described was, he was in Tokyo for a business meeting, and he needed to get in contact with his mom. But the only way he could do it was using Microsoft Explorer as the messenger tool, on his laptop. And he talked about the power of being able to speak to his mom and being connected to her through this Microsoft technology in the middle of crazy Tokyo, and the impact that, and again, the point is the feeling that came across with that one slide, that one image, and how years later you can come back to that and remember that. And that's the sign of a really, really effective presentation and effective storytelling. Hope that helps, Trinity. And I think we're at time, so I know you have a packed agenda, Kara. If there are no other questions, I want to thank you on behalf of Rob and myself and Zeta for giving us a chance to meet you all and to share a couple of nuggets. And I think it went kind of okay, right?
I think it did, and I'm sure that they also agree. And I want to remind you, Ian, when you meet with everyone again during Media Scholars Week, you have some great internship opportunities with Zeta Global. So I hope
Yes.
you'll spend some time talking to the students about those so that they can identify how they can work with you in the future as well.
Oh,
I think
absolutely look forward to that. Thank you for that. Look forward to seeing you all, Rob and I. We look forward to seeing you all in person real soon.
Great. Well, thank you for being with us. I'll let you guys drop off and we'll just wrap up really quick.
Yep. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Congratulations, everybody.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording too.